When Herod realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old or under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Now, that's a story you might be familiar with, if only from its telling at around about the time of Christmas, because it's the story, of course, from when Jesus was born. And it tells a story of King Herod, who has found out through these magi, through these sort of magicians from the east, that at about this time there was going to be a Messiah or a king that had been born. Now, for Herod, this was an imminent threat. This was a challenge to his position and to his power, and so this couldn't stand. And so as a result of that, and in his paranoia, he proceeds to order the death of the boys that were born around that time and in that sort of 2-year period. Now, what this is referred to is the massacre of the innocents, and it's only recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. There's no other historical account of this story, but it aligns itself quite well with what we know about the last years of King Herod. We know from the last few years of his life that he was becoming increasingly paranoid, that he was killing even his own children. He was becoming a particularly cruel and evil king. He'd never been great necessarily, but in the last few years of his life, he was becoming particularly terrible. But it's also one of those stories which gives us sort of a sense of, or at least sort of creates this image of King Herod as being this particularly terrible person. Most of what we know about King Herod comes from the Gospels, and none of it is very good because the people who are writing about him in the Gospels aren't particularly keen on Herod, as were really none of the Jewish people themselves. But it begs the question, who was Herod? Now, in this series, we've been looking at kind of the secondary characters of the New Testament. We've been looking at, the people that were associated with Paul in the first few weeks, and then also now we're starting to look at some of the characters associated with Jesus. Now, what we've been looking at are the characters who were on the side of Jesus and Paul, their associates, their co-workers. But for this week, we're going to take a bit of a step away from that and look at really the antagonist of Jesus. So when you think about the Gospels and the life of Jesus, one of the looming characters in the story is King Herod. He's always sort of portrayed as the antagonist of Jesus. He's the bad guy in the movie. And so he plays a very important role, not just in the life of Jesus, but in the life of Israel, in the life of the whole political scene of Israel at the time. And so he's an extraordinarily important character. But what do we really know about him? How much do we actually know about this guy? And even more importantly, which Herod are we talking about? Because in the Gospels, we actually talk about two different Herods. At the start of Jesus' life, this particular Herod we're talking about here is Herod the Great. But after him is a son, Herod Antipas, who was the ruler of Galilee at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So the son of Herod, but not the Herod that we're talking about here. So there's actually two. So we're asking the question, who are they? Who are these Herods, and what role do they play? And just generally, what do we know about them? What are actually very important characters in the story of Jesus? All right, so as with all biographies, we need to go back a little bit before the life of the actual person. We need to sort of get a sense of the political context, the family context of these people, to really get a sense of their identity, get a sense of where they've come from, and just sort of what was driving them in their own lifetimes. And so in the case of Herod, we need to go back to the story of his father, a guy by the name of Antipater. Now, Antipater was a wealthy clan chief from a region called Idumea. So it was in what was the region of Israel, but since the land had been conquered initially by the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, it was all sort of part of larger empires. And so this had really been the story, in fact, of Israel for really centuries at this point, from the Assyrians through to the Babylonians, and then to the Persians, and then to the Greeks. The land itself, Israel, had always been ruled or run by these great empires around them. And so you might live in the geographical region of Israel, but that doesn't make you Jewish at all, because in fact there was nothing really Jewish about this land anymore at this point. Now that had changed a little bit under the Persians when they'd sent back a remnant of the Jewish people who'd reestablished Jerusalem and at least reestablished a Jewish presence within the land itself. And then after the Persians came Alexander the Great, and then, of course, the expansion of the Greek Empire. But though there was a Jewish presence within Jerusalem and there were still Jews living within the area, it was very much a mixture of all different ethnicities and people from different backgrounds. It was no longer the Israel of prior to the initial occupations by these empires. And so when you get a guy like Antipater, he lives in that region, but he's not Jewish in this way. Well, that begins to change with the emergence of the Hasmonean dynasty. So the Hasmonean dynasty, they come off the back of Judas Maccabeus. Now, if you know your sort of intertestamental history, Judas Maccabeus, he revolts against the Greek powers in the region. First of all, he drives them out of Jerusalem and takes back control of the temple, takes back control of Jerusalem. And then over the next few years and over the next few generations, this Hasmonean dynasty, the descendants of Judas and his brother Simon, they continue to expand their reach. They expand the area of their power and take back more and more land and start to restore the land something more to what it was back when it was back in the Old Testament, back when it was actually Israel. So this land, this sort of new or kind of reclaimed Israel, it's ruled by this dynasty, this Hasmonean dynasty, and they're just a family dynasty. All of their children take the throne, the sons, be it sons or daughters. You've got both kings and queens that are ruling over in this dynasty. And in a way, it's a good thing because what you have are legitimate Jewish rulers. You have people who are Jewish and have Jewish ancestry that are now kings and queens of the land. That's great. But on the other hand, it's not as the Jewish people had expected. They're waiting for a king in the line of David. These people are certainly not from the line of Judah. They're Jewish, sure, but they're not in the descendants of David. That's just not what they are. But even more importantly, they're not really that Jewish. Yes, ethnically they're Jewish, but at the same time, culturally they're Greek. The problem for the Jews at this time is that they're waiting for a Jewish Messiah. They're waiting for a Jewish king to come and restore the land and to restore Israel to what it always should be, to be the people of God, to be Jewish. And so they're looking for this Messiah that is going to drive out whatever pagan overlords are there at that particular time. They kind of thought they had it with Judas, but it really wasn't the case. He and his descendants restored some of the land back to Jewish control, but they themselves were not Jewish really at all. They were very culturally Greek, and really they were just like all of the other kings of the areas around them. They were more in it for themselves. They were more in it for the family dynasty. They were more in it just for their own enrichment and self-aggrandizement. So it wasn't actually what the Jewish people had expected. But again, they had a Jewish king. And so that was a good thing. So for about a century, we have this Hasmonean dynasty that is ruling over the land and is in some ways at least maybe preparing the ground for the true Messiah to come. We've at least got the land back. Maybe this is step one, but what we're really waiting for is a truly Jewish king. Who knows what's coming next? But at the very least, we've got something close to at least in a little bit of a way, what we've been waiting for. So apart from then being more Greek in the way that they think and really just trying to incorporate very Greek ideas and Hellenistic sort of ideas. Another one of the problems that this Hasmonean dynasty sets up for themselves is the way that they convert the people. So as they're expanding their territories, the people in those territories are effectively forced to convert to Judaism. So if you want to now live in this territory, you have to be like us. You have to be Jewish. We are Jewish. We are Jewish rulers. And so if you want to be part of the inner circle and if you want any sort of political influence or any just sort of participation in the society, you have to be Jewish. And amongst these many new citizens of these new sort of participants in this new regime is a guy by the name of Antipater. So I said he's a wealthy clan chief, and what we find out about him is that he's very much he's like all elite fathers of his time. He's not just in it for himself. He's not just in it just to enrich himself and just to have his own little kingdom. He wants to set up his own dynasty. He wants his sons and his sons' sons to continue on and to establish a great family, like the great Roman families and Greek families and the Hasmonean families, all these great families that have these great dynasties and this great influence, and they can pass it on to their kids and their kids expand it and so forth and so forth. He wants to do the same thing for himself. And so the first steps of that is to get in with the powers. And that's really what Antipater is good at. He knows which way the winds are blowing. He knows politically who he needs to align himself with in order to get those opportunities. And so he sees now this is the opportunity. The rulers of this Idumea that I am part of are this Hasmonean dynasty, and so I need to align myself with them. I need to get on board with them, and if that means converting to Judaism, then so be it. I'll do that. Political expedience, he says, become a Jew in order to get in with the Jewish people. So he proceeds to do that. Now, at the same time, he's also married to an Arab noblewoman, to a local noblewoman, a woman by the name of Cypros. Now, again, all that demonstrates for us is the type of character that he is. He just knows how to align himself with the right people. Right, he's a networker. He's just really good at that. And so not just for himself, but in order to set up his kids for future, whatever that might look like. And so he's converts to Judaism to get in with the Hasmoneans. He marries this Arab noblewoman to get in with the local elites over there. Like he's making all the right moves. He's setting himself up so that he has the connections, and these connections he can then leverage and utilize to further advance his own boys. Now, at the same time as all of this is happening, the Hasmonean Empire itself is kind of on the decline. They are the local power, but during the lifetime of Antipater, they are also starting to decline with the encroaching power of Rome. The real threat, the real power that is now at work in the Mediterranean is the Roman Empire. The Greeks who are ruling everything in the east, everything east of Antipater is ruled by the Greeks, but they've never been a very strong, cohesive empire. They've always been at war with themselves, and so they've never actually been a great, the potential power they could be, they've never been that. Rome is a different story. Rome is a unified power, and they're expanding their reach all throughout the Mediterranean. So really, it's only a matter of time before Rome takes control, before Rome moves further east into these Greek territories. And sooner or later, Israel is going to come under Roman rule. It's almost a matter of inevitability. And so Antipater, again, is aware of this. He knows what's coming, and so he's ready. He knows how to connect himself in with the Romans. So again, he's a very politically savvy player. He's just a great politician in that way. So he's playing the game. He's getting all of his connections set up and building sort of his own empire to begin with. But again, it's going to be his sons that are going to utilize this. All of this is always to set up the boys that are coming after him. So the son that we know most about, of course, is Herod. So Herod is born in 72 BC. Born to Antipater, and he is going to inherit whatever Antipater is able to set up for him. And so Antipater, again, has been building these connections, building his own power base, but it's Herod that is going to take it to the next level. So one of the important things you have to do for your boys is to give them the right education. It's not just about connecting with the right people. They have to be trained in the right way. And what that looks like is a thorough Greek education. Now, what that involves is very much a very liberal arts sort of education. You're learning oratory, you're learning philosophy, you're learning all of the sciences, mathematics, all these different things. You're being trained holistically to think like a Greek. And again, the power at work in the time is the Greek Empire. So you're wanting to be trained to be part of that world. So what he gives his boys is the best possible Greek education that he can, which also includes military training. He wants his boys are going to be powerful. They're not just going to be rulers, but they're going to be generals. They're going to make a name for themselves in that way. And so he's going to give them the best of the best education. But what he also is going to give them is a Jewish education. right? He's a convert to Judaism. He's going to be influential within that Jewish realm. And so his boys need to have that same training. So he's going to give them to the best rabbis and have the rabbis train them. So these boys are really, really well set up. They've got their father's connections, his increasing wealth, but also they've also been trained in themselves to be elite, to be able to think and act and to carry themselves amongst the best of the best. So Herod is being set up and positioned absolutely perfectly for whatever is about to come. But there's always going to be something that works against him. Herod is always going to have this thing hanging over him that he's not actually Jewish. See, in order to be Jewish, you need to have a Jewish mother. Now, I say Jewish doesn't mean ethnically Jewish. To be considered to be ethnically Jewish, you need to have a mother who is Jewish. It's not your father, it's your mother, because you know who your mother is. Her bloodline is the one that is actually going to legitimate you as a Jewish descendant. He doesn't have that. He doesn't even have a Jewish father. He's coming from Gentiles. Neither of them are Jewish. His mother is an Arab noblewoman. His dad is not that either. But his only claim to Jewishness then is going to be the fact that his father is converted to Judaism. So religiously, quote unquote, he's Jewish, but ethnically he's not. Now, this is always going to work against him. It's always the fact that he's not Jewish will always, at least in the eyes of the Jewish people, will always delegitimate him. He's never going to be understood to be certainly not God's chosen king, certainly not in the line of David, because he's not even in the line of Abraham. He's not even in the line of the Jewish people. So that will always work against him. But it's not going to preclude him, because as the power structures are sort of changing, the king of the Jewish people, whoever that person is going to be, is always going to be politically appointed. It's stopped being from the line of David a long time ago. The Hasmoneans, though they're Jewish, they're certainly not from the line of David. They're not the legitimate kings in that way. So that's not going to preclude him from his potential position to be the king. Well, anyway, fast forward about 10 years, 63 BC, and the Hasmonean dynasty is in crisis. The queen is dead. We've got two sons. On the one hand, Hyrcanus, and the other hand, you've got Aristobulus. Both of these boys are vying for the throne. One of them, only one can be the king, and both of them have a legitimate claim to rule the Hasmonean dynasty, to carry on as the king of the Jewish people. But there's a dispute between the two of them as to who this is going to be, and it's a very fierce dispute. So what they decide to do is that they decide to appeal to Rome and say, can you guys mediate between the two of us as to who is going to be the king of the Jews? So both Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, they go and they see Pompey. Now, as it turns out, Pompey the Great happens to be in the region. He's on other Roman business. He's up in the north, and he's been extending Roman power into the eastern part of their empire. So he's growing the Roman Empire as it is, and he obviously wants to grow the empire as much as possible. And what he would like to do is to carry on down south into the area of Syria, into Israel, into all of these regions, and just take as much control as is possible. So this is a perfect opportunity. They appeal to Pompey because he happens to be in the area, and Pompey is absolutely going to be on board with this because he sees an opportunity for Rome to extend the power of Rome, and in doing that, extending his own glory as being the one who brings that about. So they come and they make their case to Pompey, and what is very clear is that whoever he decides is only going to have that power because Pompey allows it. Really, the writing has been on the wall for a long time, and this is going to seal the fate of the Jewish people. They are going to come under Roman rule one way or the other. Nobody's going to stop Rome coming down and just taking over at some stage. So it is inevitable that this is going to happen. It's more just a question, really, of who's going to be Rome's man. So Hyrcanus and Aristobulus make their appeal to Pompey, to Rome, and at the end of the day, Pompey chooses Hyrcanus, probably because he's a seemingly weaker option. Aristobulus is probably a little bit more subversive, perhaps. But whatever the case, Hyrcanus is seen to be the man for the job. And so the result being that he's now appointed to be the ruler of Israel. So all of that's good and well, but things have changed. Rome is now in control. By virtue of Rome appointing Hyrcanus to the job, Hyrcanus's loyalty is to Rome, and Rome was inevitably going to take. Was always going to take Israel. They're sweeping east. They're taking all the land that is before them. It was only a matter of time. And so by surrendering, by giving himself or having Rome give him the power, was effectively to say, the place is yours, but will you let me run it on your behalf? So Hyrcanus is appointed into that position. But one of the things that Pompey does is he says, we're going to change the structure a little bit. You're no longer going to be a king. So you're from the Hasmonean dynasty. You've always had kings and queens, but that's going to change with you. What you will be is the high priest. Now, if you remember with the Hasmonean dynasty, they were always they always functioned both as the king and the high priest. So whoever was in charge functioned in both roles, which was just anathema to the Jewish people, because going all the way back to Saul and when the kings were first appointed, God was very specific. Do not have a king who is also functioning as a high priest. They have to keep those roles separate. And so the fact that those roles were combined under the Hasmoneans was very problematic. But so Pompey, of course, not for any particular Jewish reasons, but more just for political expediency, he says, you're just going to be the high priest, which means that he's still in charge, but he doesn't have the same authority. It's an obvious play from the Romans to diminish his status and his standing, and to make it very clear that Rome's in control now. Rome is the one who will determine the political future of the Jews. Now, Hyrcanus, like all provincial governors, like all rulers throughout the Roman Empire, has the two jobs of empire to do: keep the peace, collect the taxes. That's his role. And so it's just that he's doing that on behalf of the Romans. The problem with Hyrcanus is that he's very ineffectual, which is perhaps why he was chosen in the first place, that he's not a strong leader, but it also meant that he was ineffectual, particularly when it comes to administration. He was just not good at the whole tax collecting thing. And so Rome had put him in that place for the purpose of collecting their taxes, and he just wasn't doing the job well enough. Now, fortunately for Hyrcanus, he had a right-hand man who is Antipater. So Antipater, who'd been positioning himself for years now, who'd been positioning his sons for all of these years, he had maneuvered himself into the family and got himself close to the Hasmoneans. And he's a political gambler. He always seems to choose the right side. So he's aligned himself with Hyrcanus, knowing that whatever destiny Hyrcanus has is going to be his destiny as well. And he's chosen correctly. And so he's now the right-hand man of Hyrcanus. And the difference is that he's very effectual. He's very effective. He's very good at doing the tax collecting. He's very good at doing the things that the Romans wanted Hyrcanus to do. So that works in his favor, because Rome quickly realizes actually Antipater is the man. It's not Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus is the token ruler, and he's fine to have because it gives the Jewish people a sense that the Hasmonean dynasty is continuing. Hyrcanus is in the line of the Hasmoneans, and so that looks good, at least on paper. But the real work has been done by Antipater, so they start to work directly with him. He starts to form that relationship with the real powers in Rome, and Hyrcanus kind of is pushed off to the side as kind of the token ruler, kind of the face of this regime. All right, so let's fast forward a few years, about 16 years, and the situation is pretty settled. You've got Hyrcanus is still the token ruler of the Jews, and you've got Antipater, who's actually the real player, the one who's actually doing the work and is basically he's the one with the connection to Rome. Well, we come to 47 BC, and Rome is in turmoil. They're in the midst of a civil war, and there's a whole story why this came about. Basically, what it boils down to is that Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus are both vying effectively for control of Rome for different reasons. But what it boils down to is that these two men have brought Rome to the point of civil war, and the winner, whoever's going to prevail from this war, is going to get control of Rome. So that's That's what the stakes are. Rome is about to be fundamentally changed, and it's going to come down to which one of these men prevails at the end of this war. Now, what this means then for everybody is that they again have to choose sides. So you don't know what the outcome's going to be, but if you pick wrong, then that is going to bode poorly for you, because the victor is going to prevail, and they're going to look around at all the people that supported their opponent, and that could end very badly. So you've got to, again, it's a 50-50 shot, but you've still got to make your choice. You've still got to pick a side and stick with it. So Antipater, again, is in the position where he's choosing sides. Now, again, he chooses correctly. So he aligns himself with Caesar. He supports Caesar throughout all of this campaign. And in one particular point, Caesar is down in Egypt, and he's in conflict with the Egyptians, particularly with the last Ptolemy of Egypt. And he's in dire peril. He's been encircled in Alexandria, and however this, or if this goes badly for him, that will be the end of that'll be the end of Caesar. He'll be crushed. He and his forces will be crushed, and that will be the end of his story. Well, Antipater comes in to his rescue. He comes in with his own forces, and he supports Caesar, and he tips the scales. He manages to help Caesar out of this situation so that Caesar is able to prevail and ultimately take control of Egypt. So this is a huge victory for Caesar, but he also never forgets the fact that Antipater was the one who tipped the scales. It was the one who actually helped him through this. And so this, of course, bodes well for Antipater later on, because at the end of this civil war, Caesar is the one who prevails. So Caesar defeats Pompey, and in doing so takes control of Rome. He becomes the dictator of Rome. And the whole Roman political structure has now changed. It used to be run by a senate. It used to be run by elected bureaucrats. Now it's run by one man. And this one man is going to determine the future of Rome. Well, the fact that Antipater had supported him and has shown him loyalty, that really bodes well for him now, because he is going to have Caesar effectively offering him an open checkbook. What is it? What can I do for you? How can I support you? So again, he's gambled. And he's won. He's gambled correctly, and he's come out on top. So he's really doing well so far. So for Antipater, this is great. It means that he's got Rome on his side, and specifically Caesar. He's got Caesar, who's now in control of Rome, is on his side. And he's effectively achieved what he's been striving for this whole time. He's got to the top. He's got as high as he can. Hyrcanus is still in power. Hyrcanus is still the token ruler, but Antipater is the one who's got the ear of Rome. And that also extends to his sons. So you've got now Herod and his brother Phasael, who are both now going to benefit from the way that their father has positioned them. Well, anyway, Caesar then appoints Antipater formally now as the governor. Now, prior to this, again, it had been Hyrcanus. He was the high priest, and still remains the high priest, and so has that token leadership role. And Antipater was just working for him. Antipater was the one who was actually doing the bureaucracy, executing the will of Rome. Well, now it's made formal. Now he's actually a governor. Now he actually has the Rome's authority to do the things that he's doing. So now he's got there. He's actually got the title. He's now the governor of Israel. And again, this influence or this opportunity extends to his sons. So what he does is that he divides Israel up into two sections. In the north, in Galilee, he appoints Herod as the governor of that particular region. And then in the south, in Judea, Phasael has control over that region. And their job remains the same. It's the same job of empire: keep the peace, collect the taxes. But they're doing it on behalf of their father. So in the same way that Antipater has been doing this on behalf of Hyrcanus, now his boys are doing that for him. But this is great for them, because now Rome gets to see them. They get exposed to Rome, and Rome can see the sort of men that they are, how effective they actually are. And they're very effective. They're very good at what they're doing. They're administering the area well. They're collecting the taxes. Everything is going well for Antipater and his boys, and Rome is looking on them favorably. So again, just the positioning of all of this is absolutely spot on. The guy's really just nailed it when it comes to establishing not just himself, but establishing a future dynasty for his sons and for the generations, hopefully, that will come after. Well, now Herod starts to come into the story. Now he's late 20s, maybe early 30s at this point, and he's starting to establish himself, and so is his brother. But Herod is really starting to come of age now. And he's looking at his own future and realizes that for himself, it's going to be politically advantageous to marry properly. And this is really the case for all elite marriages in the ancient world. You don't marry for love, you marry for political position. You marry for advancement in society. It always has a pragmatic benefit. So this is no different for Herod. And so for a wife, he chooses Miriamne, who is the granddaughter of Hyrcanus. So Hyrcanus, he's the last ruling descendant of the Hasmonean dynasty, and so has that recognition, and the people, they respect him by virtue of him being a Hasmonean. He's actually Jewish, and he has that heritage with him. And so his granddaughter is a prize bride because she has the status that comes with being a Hasmonean. She is from the Hasmonean dynasty. And so for Herod, he will always struggle with the fact that he's not Jewish, and this will always be a problem for him moving forward into the rest of his career. It's the fact that he's not actually Jewish. His father converted to Judaism, but he was not a Jew, and so therefore neither is Herod. I mean, his mother is an Arab. She's not a Jew. And so that's always going to work against him. So the best thing that he can do, apart from converting and adhering to Judaism, is to marry a Jewish woman, because he will never be Jewish, but at least his boys will. Because if you remember, the Jewishness comes through the mother. And so if he's got a Jewish wife, his kids and his dynasty will actually be Jewish. So this is kind of thinking ahead. It's the best that he can possibly do for himself in terms of trying to endear himself to the people. If he marries the granddaughter of Hyrcanus, that at least gives some sort of approval to him, some sort of confirmation of him, endorsement by Hyrcanus that he's allowing him to marry his granddaughter. So he does this, and so Miriamne becomes his wife, and it's just another clever step in his political maneuvering, in moving himself closer into the power and ultimately to establish himself for his future career. Well, anyway, in all of this, everything seems to be moving well. Everything seems to be falling into place for Antipater and his family. Things are great. He's got Caesar's backing. Caesar is in charge now. He's the sole ruler of Rome. He's showing favor to Antipater. All of this is great. His boys are going to benefit from all of this. But then in 44 BC, tragedy strikes. Caesar is assassinated. And this leads then to another civil war. So the question of this civil war again is who is going to be in charge of Rome? And it comes down to a choice between Mark Antony, who was the 2IC or the lieutenant of Caesar, and Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Caesar. And both of them are ultimately going to vying for the power of Rome. Whoever, again, wins this civil war will take Caesar's place as the ruler of Rome. So everyone is put back in the position again, and only in a short space of time from the last time this happened, of pick a side. One of these two is going to win. You better be on the winning side when all the dust settles. So Antipater again places his bets, puts his money on Mark Antony. And again, he's successful. Mark Antony prevails. He kills Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Caesar. And so he with Octavian, the adopted son of Caesar, they take control of Rome. So again, this is great. He's made the right call. He's aligned himself correctly with Mark Antony. This will benefit not so much him, but in the long run will actually benefit his sons. But in 43 BC, the next year, tragedy actually strikes the family. In this case, one of the political rivals of Antipater, a guy by the name of Malichus, he has Antipater killed. Now, the reasons for this are pretty simple. He just wants Antipater's position. He wants to be Antipater. Antipater is now the leading man of the Jews. He's working directly first with Caesar and now with Mark Antony. He is the man in charge. Again, Hyrcanus is still on the scene, but he's not he's a non-entity. Antipater's the one with all the power, the influence, the wealth. He's the one in the hot seat. And so he's going to have political rivals, as you would expect. Malichus, his chief political rival, bribes the cupbearer of Antipater and bribes him to poison Antipater, which he proceeds to do. And so Antipater is dead. He's gone, cut down in the prime of his life. Well, the idea of that, of course, would be that Malichus would then be able to step into that space and become the new Antipater. He will become the new man in the hot seat. But what he doesn't calculate is the fact that Herod and Phasael, the sons, are both very popular. They're the ones that actually are doing the work of the governing, and they're very popular, very good at it, and they've got Rome's support. And so they ultimately become more popular. They become more entrenched in their position by virtue of the fact that their father has now been killed. They kind of become the sons of a martyr. So this actually works really well in their favor. They're more deeply entrenched in their position, and Malichus is ultimately executed himself for murder, for what he originally did to Antipater. So now this changes the situation again. This time even more in the favor of Herod and Phasael. Now that their father is out of the picture, Rome still needs people to deal with. They still need to be able to work through the local governors. And they've already got two very effective governors in place. In the north, in Galilee, they've got Herod. And in the south, in Judea, they've got Phasael. So this is perfect. They've got their men already in place that are doing the job, that are already effective. And so the only thing that's changed really is that Antipater, the middleman, is taken out of the picture. So that's fine. He's gone. And so now we can just deal directly with the boys. So now Herod and Phasael, they've got the direct line to Rome rather than going through their father. Now they've got the direct line to Rome themselves. So this just further establishes their own position. And whatever further political developments will happen, they will be the ones to benefit from that as we see as this story unfolds. But as with all of these stories, we need a plot twist. Right? Things are going too well. Everything seems to be going smooth sailing for Herod to this point. It can't be that simple. Nothing is ever that simple. And in this story, it is no different. It's never that simple. So if you remember going back to Hyrcanus and his brother Aristobulus were vying for control of were vying to become the kings in the line of the Hasmoneans. So that goes all the way back to Pompey. So 20 odd years ago, these two brothers are vying for power. Well, Hyrcanus, as we know, he won. He was appointed by Pompey to be the high priest, and Aristobulus was eliminated. He was killed, removed from the scene. But Aristobulus had a son. Now, his son was only young at the time. And it's like one of those movies where, at the start of the movie, you've got one of the characters is killed, and then the camera pans over to his 10-year-old son who sees this, and it's just like there's his memory etched into his mind. And, you just know somewhere later on he's going to reemerge and he's going to exact revenge on his father's murderers. Well, that's exactly what happens. His son Antigonus, he comes back on the scene with a legitimate claim to the throne, with a legitimate claim to be the ruler of the Jewish people, because he is actually, one, Jewish, and two, in the line of the Hasmoneans. Now, the power right now in Israel is Phasael and Herod, who are the sons of Antipater, none of whom are Jewish. The closest association we have with the Hasmonean line is the fact that Herod has married into the family. He married Mariamne. But he's not Jewish, and everybody knows it. As effective as he might be, as good effective a leader as he might be, he'll never be a legitimate Jewish ruler because he's not Jewish. Antigonus, on the other hand, absolutely is. So Antigonus has a claim, and by virtue of being a genuine Hasmonean and by actually being Jewish, is going to get a lot of popular support. So he goes to Jerusalem and makes his claim. You remember Phasael is the one who's ruling in Jerusalem at the time. Now Antigonus comes in and says, actually, no, I should be here. I am the legitimate heir to the Hasmonean throne. This is rightfully my position. I should be the one who is in charge here. So this is causing a problem for Phasael, especially because, his cousin over here is laying claim to the position. Hyrcanus as well. This is a problem for Hyrcanus because he's from the Hasmoneans as well, but he's not a legitimate ruler. No one's ever really taken him seriously anyway. And so this is a real threat. This is becoming a real problem. Now, what people don't realize at the time is that Antigonus actually has a very powerful backer, someone behind the scenes, hiding in the shadows, but supporting his claim are the Parthians. Now, one more dimension of the story, I'll add this in, hopefully it's still making sense. If you imagine where Jerusalem is on the edges of the Roman Empire at this particular point in history. And so it's a very tenuous area. Okay, if you're controlling Jerusalem, you're controlling that area, but for the Romans, it's a very precarious position because it's only just a little bit into the eastern part of the empire. It's just a little bit away from the Mediterranean, but all the way out to the east are the Parthians. The Parthian Empire is the next great empire next to the Romans. And so they're sort of the neighbors of the Romans, and they are obviously constantly antagonistic towards one another. For the Parthians, they've got Rome on their border, and Rome only has to decide to encroach further into their territories, and that's a problem. On the other hand, Rome, right on the edges of their territory where they're at their weakest, could at any point be pushed back by the Parthians. So there's always this tension between the Romans and the Parthians, and somewhere in the middle of this is Jerusalem. So on the one hand, you've got Phasael, he's Rome's man. So Rome will always support Phasael, and with that, Hyrcanus and Herod. But on the other hand, you've got Antigonus, who, as we come to find out, has Parthian support. So effectively what this is going to become is a bit of a proxy war. We hear so much about proxy wars in the Middle East. They're old news, right? Rome, on the one hand, is going to be working through Phasael, and on the other hand, the Parthians are going to be working through Antigonus, the two local leaders, but really the war is between Rome and Parthia. Well, anyway, Antigonus comes into Jerusalem, makes his claim to be the ruler of Jerusalem, and with that, the Jewish people. And that obviously leads to a standoff. Of course, Phasael's not going to turn around and go, oh, yeah, sure, okay, no worries, sorry about the mix-up, I'll step back and you can take over. Of course, there's going to be a standoff. Well, at that point, the Parthians step in and they say, how about we mediate between you two? So Phasael and Antigonus, how about you come over here to Damascus and we'll have a meeting, we'll have a conference, and we'll figure out who is going to be the one to rule. So they agree to that. Stupidly enough, they agree to that. And so Phasael and Hyrcanus, they go to Damascus to have this conference to mediate this situation with Antigonus, who they come to realize is actually being supported by the Parthians. And so when they arrive, they realize, oh, this was a trap. We have been duped into coming here. And so this is not going to end well. What the Parthians do first to Hyrcanus is that they castrate him. So the thing about being a high priest is that physically you have to be perfect. You can't have any sort of physical issues. And most especially, you can't be castrated. So the fact that he's castrated, they don't kill him, they castrate him. It's kind of a double shame. It's the shame of having been castrated to begin with. That's a tragedy in itself, but also the fact that it eliminates him from his position of the high priest. So they don't actually need to kill him. They just need to disqualify him from his position. So he can no longer be the high priest. He can no longer be recognized by the Jewish people as a high priest by virtue of the fact that he's being castrated. Now, Phasael, on the other hand, seeing what's happening, realizing that he's been trapped, he's been imprisoned, that this is not going to go well for him, he takes his own life. He commits suicide. And so obviously whatever claim he had is now gone because he's dead. And this leaves a power vacuum. Back in Jerusalem, there is no one in control. And so the most obvious person that could step into that space would now be Antigonus. Well, anyway, Herod, seeing what's going on, realizes that the writing is on the wall. You've got Antigonus coming with the Parthians, and this is a problem. They're coming for Jerusalem, but ultimately they're coming for him as well. So what is he going to do? Well, obviously, he's going to go and appeal to the Romans. The Romans are ultimately his backers. He's there because of them in the first place. Naturally, he's going to have their support. And of course, it's in Rome's best interest to keep Herod in place because he's their man, right? They know who Herod is, and so naturally they're going to want to continue to work with him. And the last thing they want to have in that place is Antigonus with his Parthian backers. Parthia is the natural enemy of Rome. We want to defeat those people. We don't want them anywhere near our territories. So it is in absolutely the Rome's best interest to support Herod in what is about to happen. Well, anyway, Herod, he goes to Rome and he makes his appeal to Mark Antony, who's given him this position in the first place. And Mark Antony turns around and says, "Yeah, of course, naturally, we're going to support you. If you go back to Jerusalem, we will send our armies with you. We'll support you. We'll make sure that you have all of our backing." But then they go one step further, and they actually say to Herod, "Not only will we support you, we will declare you to be the king of the Jews." Right? It's going to be far easier for us just to have one person, our man, somebody who's loyal to us, and you're going to be loyal to us because we're about to make this possible for you. You'll be loyal to us, we will support you, and so you can be our man as the king. You can be the king of the Jews. That's what you've always wanted. That's what your dad wanted for you. Well, we're going to give that to you. But you have to win it. We'll give you the support, we'll give you the armies, we'll give you all of that, but you actually have to go and do the work. You've got to be the one to actually go in there and push back Antigonus and all of his Parthian allies. So that's on you. We'll give you everything we can, but you've got to do the work. Herod's like, fantastic, like where do I sign up? This is even more than what I expected. He knew he'd get Roman support, but to be declared the king of the Jews on top of that is just like an extraordinary bonus. So all of this is fantastic for Herod, but he still has work to do. He's still got to go back and take back Jerusalem, which is now under new management. So Antigonus has moved in, he's got his Parthians in there. He now needs to be dislodged from Jerusalem in order for Herod to be able to take control and to take back his rightful territory. Well, following from this, we have a 3-year siege. Jerusalem is under siege for the next 3 years as Herod is trying to dislodge Antigonus from Jerusalem. And it's not like Antigonus hasn't got any support. The people want him to be there. Now, there's plenty of people that are siding with Herod because they realize that Herod's actually got Rome behind him, that Herod can bring a lot of benefits to us. So Herod has his supporters, but so does Antigonus. Remember, he's a Jew. He's from the Hasmonean dynasty. And quite frankly, most of the Jews hate the Romans. And so anybody who is opposed to the Romans is enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, of course, he's going to have plenty of supporters. But it still doesn't change the situation where you need to get these people out. You need to kill these people. And so for the next 3 years, we have this absolutely devastating battle that occurs between Antigonus and Herod. It's a tragic situation that we find ourselves in. Very bloody. A lot of people are killed, and just a lot of atrocities occurring. Herod has a lot of blood on his hands. He, in trying to become the king of the Jews, kills a lot of Jewish people in order to do that. So this will mar him. He's already got a few ticks in the negative column. There's in the pro and con list, there's plenty of things already in the con list. This is a big one because he is responsible for the death of many, many Jews and the temple. The temple itself is damaged and partly destroyed through all of this battle, through all this conquest. So ultimately, after 3 years, Herod wins. He gets a final victory over his rival Antigonus, and the Parthians are driven out. But it comes at an enormous cost. And so Herod has won. He's won the battle, but the war is a whole different story that he now has to fight. But nevertheless, it's 37 BC. Herod is now officially the king of the Jews with Rome's support. And, well, he's the man. He is in control of Galilee. He's in control of Judea. All of that territory is now under his rule. So it's good in that way. He's got what he's been striving for his whole life to this point. But now there's a lot of work to do, not just in rebuilding the city and rebuilding the nation, but also in trying to somehow restore his reputation, to try to somehow win these people over, because he still also has another job to do, which is the job of the Romans, which is to keep the peace and collect the taxes. So this is what he has to proceed to do now for the rest of his life. All right, so Israel is under new management. The Hasmonean dynasty is officially gone. Hyrcanus was the last recognized legitimate ruler of the Hasmonean dynasty. He's gone. He's been castrated. He's no longer a political entity at all. Antigonus, he's dead. He was potentially an heir to the throne. Potentially he could have taken over. He's now dead. He's been defeated along with his armies. So all that is left standing is Herod, and behind him is Rome. So he's in a firm position. There's no question about that. So now we move from what was the Hasmonean dynasty to the Herodian dynasty. So this is the new power. This is the new one. This is the new authority in the region. And so from the year 37 onwards, we have King Herod, backed by the Romans, and whatever happens next is entirely on him. He is going to establish for himself this brand new dynasty. Everything his father had been dreaming of all the way back in Idumea when he was converting to Judaism, everything he's been working towards is now being fulfilled in his son Herod. But as I said, Herod has a lot of work to do. He's got a lot of restoring to do, not just in the sense that so much of Jerusalem and particularly the temple has been destroyed, but his reputation is mud. He was already hated as a governor by many people because he's not even Jewish and he's a Roman puppet. But even amongst his supporters, he's probably going to have lost a lot of his supporters because he's killed a lot of Jews. He is a very, very isolated man. As the king of the Jews, he's extraordinarily isolated. The only thing that's keeping him in power is the fact that he's got Roman backing, because no one's going to push back against Rome. That's just not something that's going to happen. So this is what the task is ahead of him. Somehow trying to restore something of his reputation, try to restore the land. Now, on paper, he's very successful at doing this. What he does actually is really quite extraordinary. But as we see, particularly in the Gospels, the way that he's portrayed, it's always as this evil tyrant. He is always the bad guy in the story. There is nothing positive, certainly from the Gospel point of view, to say about Herod. And he doesn't help his own cause, as we see towards the end of his life when he starts to really lose his marbles. But he's never accepted. Even if he was legitimately Jewish, even if he hadn't caused all of the tragedy that he'd caused in becoming the king, he's always Rome's man. He will never be accepted if only by virtue of the fact that he's a Roman puppet. He's not a king appointed by God. He's not a high priest. He's a Roman appointment, and his loyalty will always be to Rome. And so that's the tension that he has to walk in. On the one hand, he's got Jewish people that generally despise him, and even if they like him, it's only because out of pragmatic reasons, this is what he can do for them. But his loyalty is also to Rome, and so he's trying to be Roman, but he's also trying to be Jewish, and he can never be both. Because to be Jewish is to be anti-Roman, and to be Roman is to be loyal to Rome. And it's not to side with the Jewish people and take their side on things, because that's not how it works to be ruling in the Roman Empire. So he's never going to ever be able to manage this. The best he can really do is to somehow try to maintain the peace as much as possible and do his best to try to restore the nation, if only for his own glory. If only for his own reputation of the greatness that he brought about. And that's really what he sets about to do. He sets about to make Israel great again. He's going to be the one who's going to rebuild and make incredible what has become a pretty decimated place. And so probably one of the main achievements, one of the things that he's most famous for, is for his temple, Herod's temple. This is the third temple. We've had the temple originally built by Solomon. There was a second temple that was rebuilt by Zerubbabel. That temple was had been largely neglected, largely destroyed, not just through Herod, but through Antiochus a century prior to this. There'd been a lot that was diminishing that temple. And so he just basically starts again. This is his major contribution, his major building project is to build this temple. And what he builds is a temple that is the largest temple of the ancient world. It is absolutely enormous. If you've been to Jerusalem, you know this thing is absolutely enormous. The ground, the mount itself, just the sanctuary area itself is just huge. And the temple, there's nothing left of the temple that was destroyed. But what you can see of it is just, again, it's absolutely an extraordinary structure. And this was huge. This temple was still being built even when Jesus was an adult. I mean, it wasn't finished in Herod's own lifetime. It was such a massive project that even when Jesus was visiting the temple with his disciples, it was still under construction at that point. So absolutely enormous, and probably the thing that he's most famous for, and certainly something that can still be seen today. But what he also builds are new cities. One in particular is the city Caesarea Maritima. Now, Caesarea Maritima becomes actually the capital of the region. So Jerusalem is no longer the capital. Caesarea Maritima is. Now, Caesarea Maritima is a place you can still go and visit today. You can still go and walk through the remains of this city. Now, this city, the name itself might give it away. Caesarea, named after Caesar, it was a city built in honor of his new patron, Caesar Augustus, who was the one who's keeping him in power. So throughout the course of Herod's rule, the main emperor for his life was the Emperor Augustus. And so he builds this beautiful Roman city in honor of his patron, Caesar. Now, what that city becomes is the Roman base of operations. That's the Roman capital. So whenever Romans visit, particularly when the governors later on come to stay in Israel, that's where they stay. They stay in Caesarea. And what you see of this city is that it's a Roman city. It's not a Jewish city. It's built on Roman architecture. It's built to be a Rome away from Rome. So if you're a Roman governor and you're coming to stay, you want to feel at home, and you're as much at home as in Caesarea as you could be anywhere else. So Jerusalem remains the spiritual capital, but on the other hand, Caesarea becomes the actual official political capital, and it's a brand new city. The port of Caesarea, it's a very shallow bay that it has there. And so he builds a port further out into the water. And again, look it up the port of Caesarea, just do a Google search of it. It's absolutely extraordinary, the concrete technology that's used to build this. So it's just an amazing structure. And other building projects, building roads, building other cities, rebuilding the temple. What Herod accomplishes is absolutely extraordinary. In terms of infrastructure, in terms of the architecture, it's absolutely extraordinary. The land itself, Israel, becomes a tourist attraction. It becomes a place to come and visit because of these extraordinary things that Herod is doing. So he really is making the place great again. He's making it an incredible place. It's becoming prosperous. By all of these building projects, you're creating work. You're bringing you're bringing money into your economy, you're bringing jobs into the economy. He's doing the right things. Everything he's doing is good for the people, and they're flourishing as a result. They're prospering as a result of this. But again, he's not a legitimate king. He's not what they're waiting for, and so he will never be able to win the people over. It's kind of like just he's given them all of these wonderful things, but they're just throwing it back in his face. So he still continues to do this and spends out of his own pocket, money out of his own pocket. But again, it doesn't have the impact that he desires. But he's also not helping his own case either. Again, he's not Jewish. And the fact that he's a Roman client king, he's not in the line of David, that will always, if there was nothing else that he did wrong, that will always disqualify him. He will always be unpopular in the eyes of the people because at the end of the day, whatever he does, however great he might claim to be, he's always working for the Romans. But he does other things that don't help his cause either. For example, he appoints his own high priests. Now, he's not as audacious or presumptuous as the Hasmonean dynasty was, which is that they were the king and the high priest. He doesn't do that. He appoints high priests, but that's the point. He appoints his own high priests. High priests should always come from Levi, should always be appointed by God. He appoints his own high priests. Now, that's in his best interest because the high priest is kind of the de facto power. He's the king. He's responsible to Rome, but the high priest, the one who's the representative in the temple, is the Jewish representative to the people. He's the one that the people are actually looking to as to be the one in charge, the one that they look to for guidance. And so the high priest has the real power in that sense, the real political power in that sense. Well, if that's the position and if that's the responsibility, you don't want any old person doing that job. You want your man in the job. In the same way that Herod is Rome's man, the high priest needs to be Herod's man. So he appoints his own high priests. And who is he going to appoint? Well, the ones that are most loyal to him, which is to say loyal to Rome and loyal to Herod's agenda. And how do you get that position? Well, that's going to cost you a lot of money. And so they're getting these positions by being a part of Herod's inner circle, by paying the highest bribes. They are not legitimate high priests. And so they have some authority, but at the same time, they're never going to be popular. And so by virtue of that, neither is Herod, because they're actually just working for him and he's the one that appointed them. Now, I've already mentioned that he's killed plenty of Jews so far when he retook Jerusalem, but even his own wife, Miriamne, remember the granddaughter of Hyrcanus, the last living descendant of the Hasmonean dynasty, like an actual genuine Jewish princess. That's his wife, but she is brought up on suspicions of adultery. Now, the suspicions are not true because where they come from is from another woman who actually wants to get in and become the wife of Herod, because that's where the power is. Like, she wants to become the new queen. Well, she starts to spread some rumors that Miriamne is having an affair, and Herod is quite paranoid at this point. He's trying to control his power, and he doesn't want to be seen. He certainly doesn't want to be the cuckold of some other guy, and so he has Miriamne killed. Now, that's bad enough. You're not just killing your wife; you're killing a legitimate queen of the Jewish people, and the one that they might have actually respected. But they had two sons. Now, these two sons at the time were in Rome. They were being educated by Augustus, right? They were actually in Rome itself, being trained amongst the elites of the Roman Empire. They got wind of this, and so they naturally opposed the fact that, hey, you killed our mum. All right, that's not good. We don't like that idea. And so, well, he had both of them killed as well. And so he starts to get a bit of a reputation of a guy who is just very happy to kill anybody who is even seen to be, even presumed to be perhaps opposed to him. And where that's picked up in that story in Matthew 2, in the murder of the innocents. Now, that's the only account we have of that story, that he would order these boys, these 2-year-old and younger, to be murdered. We don't have any other accounts from any other ancient historians, but it rings true because of everything else that he's doing at that stage of his life. In the last few years of his life, he's just becoming, he's really out of his mind. And so the idea of him killing babies to protect his position, that's fitting for who this guy was. And so for all of these wonderful things that he does, all of the building projects, all of these great things that he does, what he's doing parallel to that is making him even more hated. He was already hated. There was already suspicion around him to begin with, but as his rule went on and his reign went on, it just got worse and worse and worse. Well, eventually in 4 BC, Herod dies. All of his age, especially, but also all this disease and everything catches up with him, and he eventually dies. And he's really not missed. It's certainly not. It's not a tragedy, and there's not weeping and wailing in the streets. People are quite happy that he's gone. But this changes the political situation again. In the first place, actually, it's worth noting the fact that he dies in 4 BC and that Jesus is born whilst he's still alive would give us an indication of Jesus's approximate date of birth. So we always think, Jesus was born in the year 0 because that's when the church sort of calculated the calendar that we now use. But actually, in fact, he would have been a few years earlier than that. So Jesus probably would have been born about 5 BC, thereabouts. So just as a little FYI. But for Rome, they are looking at a succession plan. Now, Augustus is now the emperor. All of the political situation that has kind of led to Herod being in place there in the first place, all of that's settled down now. Augustus is now established as the emperor of Rome, and he's the one who calls the shots. He's the one who ultimately is deciding who will run the different provinces. He will be the one in charge of what happens in his empire. And so he's looking now at the future of Israel, of Judea and Galilee in these regions, and realizing that just to have one of the sons of Herod take the whole thing is going to be problematic. He's got a few sons that are still alive, and it's a question of which one of them is going to succeed their father. Now, one of the ways that you can potentially alleviate a future civil war, if you give it to one and all the other sons are trying to get the power off the one that got the power, one of the ways that you can deal with this is just to divide it all up. And so what you end up seeing happening is that Israel is divided up into different provinces. Now, the two that are important for us, the ones that we come across in the Gospels, are Galilee in the north and Judea in the south. Now, Galilee is given to Herod Antipas. So he becomes the king of that province, and so that's his region, and that's where Jesus is born. So that's why we meet a Herod when Jesus is an older guy. When he's older in his adult ministry, Herod is in charge, but it's not the same Herod as when Jesus was born. So it's the son of Herod. But when we come to the south in Judea, you meet Pontius Pilate. So you've got a Roman governor in the south, but you've got a Jewish king, a descendant of the Herodian dynasty, ruling in the north. So what changed there? Well, 4 BC, this area is divided up. They all take control of their respective areas. In the south, Herod Archelaus, the brother of Herod Antipas, he's given Judea, but he's useless. He is less than useless as a ruler and universally hated by everybody. And so they petition the Romans to get rid of him. And so, that's just to give you an indication of how bad this guy is. They've got an actual Jewish king, but they're like, no, give us a Roman instead. That's how bad this guy is. Now, to be fair, there was a good reason for them wanting to get rid of Herod Archelaus. So 6 AD, they get rid of him. But the real reason is more to remove a direct leader in Jerusalem. So you've got a guy who's ruling you on behalf of the Romans in your city. So you're the Jewish authorities, you're the Jewish priesthood, and you don't like the Romans, and you certainly don't want them living and breathing down your neck all the time and monitoring everything you do. You want to get the eyes as far away as you can from where you are so that you've got a bit more autonomy to do your own thing. So the best way to achieve that is to have the emperor himself ruling over you. Rather than a local ruler, you want the emperor to be the one to do that. And so they petition the emperor for a governor. All those governors, they live in Caesarea Maritima. So they don't live in Jerusalem. They live in the Roman city that Herod had originally built. So that's where they dwell, which means that they're a good distance from Jerusalem. They're not actually in the city itself. They're living in their own nice, brand new Roman city. So that's great because that gives them some distance. That means that the Jewish authorities can get away with a little bit more because they don't have direct oversight. So that's a perfect scenario that they find for themselves. But what it ultimately means is the political situation is different in the two different regions. In the north, in Galilee, you've got Herod, and in the south, you've got a Roman governor. But what that, at least for the purposes of our story, it indicates to us that the Herod that we are reading about are actually two different Herods. In the first case, you've got Herod the father, and he's the main character. He's the beginning of this Herodian dynasty. But then the Herod we meet later on is the son, Herod Antipas. He's the one who sort of carries on the throne from his father. But anyway, hopefully that's been helpful. One of the very important cast of characters of the New Testament, but definitely the antagonist. Definitely, in many ways, the bad guy of the story. Certainly not one of Jesus' co-workers, but one of the very important figures that gives some context to the nature of Jesus and to his ministry. Well, anyway, have a really, really great week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. All the best.